So thank you everyone for coming to the 9th Annual Harker Research Symposium. We are honored to have with us today Mr. Salman Khan, the founder and executive director of Khan Academy, which is a nonprofit educational organization created to provide a quality education to anyone, anywhere in the world, and one which has truly revolutionized the concept of learning. Khan Academy was founded on the premise of using video to reinvent education, tearing down financial and social barriers to learning. Ever since its humble beginnings of simply serving as a way through which to tutor young cousins, Khan Academy has delivered over 300 million lessons, reaching over 10 million students throughout the globe. Most recently, Khan Academy announced its partnership with the College Board to develop free world-class SAT test preparation material. Throughout his educational journey, Mr. Khan has exhibited a variety of talents spanning from beyond just his intellect, and often for the benefit of others. After receiving 2 Bachelor of Science degrees in Mathematics and Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and 1 Master of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Mr. Khan earned his MBA at Harvard Business School. In addition to these academic achievements, he is a gifted musician and quick learner, as he sung his high school valedictorian speech while playing a guitar, and also once held a job at Princeton Review as an MCAT instructor, despite never having prepared for or taking the MCAT himself. This eclectic nature is perhaps what has enabled him to touch so many people's lives. In my own household, my 11-year-old sister, my parents, and I have all used Khan Academy from tutorial videos ranging from those on multivariable calculus to entrepreneurship and art history. From personal experience, I can say that this resource he has created is an invaluable supplement to traditional classroom learning, and I'm confident that his lessons will continue to shape the minds of future leaders. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce a man who has been profiled by 60 Minutes, featured on the cover of Forbes magazine, recognized as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world, and who is a true inspiration and a celebrity of our times. Please put your hands together for Mr. Salman Khan to discuss his perspective on education reimagined.
Thank you very much. I always like introductions that set low expectations, so that was... So I have a feeling that I'm talking to an audience that's reasonably familiar with Khan Academy, but I always do like to start gauging how familiar you are. How many of y'all actually use the site to learn things? Okay, a good number. And how many of you have no idea what Khan Academy is? Good, okay, that's why we're here. We're gonna be able to... So to get everyone on the same page, as was introduced, Khan Academy is often most known for this collection of videos that I started making. But as we'll see, it's much, much more than that. And actually, it started off being much, much more than videos, and that's kind of where we're going. But to get everyone on the same page, I'll show you what the videos actually look like. Click it right here.
Of these interactions are just due to the gravity.
This is an age right after Isaac Newton.
I'm told the humidity makes it feel hotter. Why is this?
Excellent question, LeBron.
And you can just see the pleasure he had.
Can you determine which light bulb is being switched?
Things actually can interbreed, although for these two in particular, it seems like the mechanics would get kind of difficult.
And I can keep playing around with these numbers and see what kind of colors I can come up with.
If this does not blow your mind, then you have no emotion.
Yes. I could tell y'all would appreciate Euler's identity. But it's much more than just the videos. Some of y'all might be familiar. This is our computer science platform, where the goal of it is to really show the creative side of computer science, where students can log in, create projects, branch off of other people's projects, review what other people are doing, have your own portfolios. And we've actually at Khan Academy already hired 2 people just based on the work that they've done on the computer science platform and what other people thought of it. The real, I would say, meat of what we're doing, this is what most of our organization is focused on, is our kind of interactive math dashboard, where students come, they take a pretest, it's building a statistical model of what they know and don't know, and start giving game mechanics around so the student can start wherever they are, and it takes them wherever they need to go. They can start in arithmetic and take them as far as trigonometry or calculus or wherever else. And just to give a snapshot of where we are now, We're used in some way, shape, or form in almost every country. It's about 10 million students every month are using Khan Academy. There's been 300,000 educators using it. We're approaching 2 billion exercises done on Khan Academy. And before I kind of talk more about where all of this is heading and what we're up to, I'll take a little bit of a step back and talk about how all of this started. And I think a good number of you are probably somewhat familiar with the story, but maybe this will fill in a few gaps. If you rewind back to 2004, I was based in Boston. I was a year out of business school. I had just gotten married. This was summer of 2004. And some of my family was visiting me from New Orleans, and that's where I was born and raised as well. And it was my aunt, my uncle, and their 3 children, my cousins, Nadia, Arman, and Ali. And Nadia, who was 12 years old at the time, it just kind of came out of conversation. Actually, her mom told me first that, hey, Sal, you know, Nadia seems to be having a little bit of trouble with math. When I talked to Nadia about it, she said, yeah, you know, I took this placement exam at the end of 6th grade. And Nadia, she's like, you know, I've been a pretty good student. I've been getting A's and B's, but this exam had unit conversion on it, you know, ounces to gallons, meters to kilometers. And I said, I just don't understand that. And I told her, well, look, I'm completely convinced that you're capable of that. I think she was a little skeptical. So I kind of said, well, look, you go back to New Orleans. If you're up for it, we'll get on the phone every evening and we'll work together. And she agreed. And so that fall, this August of 2004, every evening working with Nadia over the phone, we eventually figured out some way on the internet using Yahoo Instant Messenger to kind of see writing as well. And the first month was difficult. She had kind of convinced herself that she's just not capable of processing mathematics. But then after about a month, things started to click in. She got unit conversion. She started to get caught up with where she needed to be. Then, frankly, she got a little bit ahead of where she needed to be. And at that point, I became what I call a tiger cousin. And so I called up her school, and I said, you know, I really think Nadia Reimagined should retake that placement exam. And they said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. And somewhat surprisingly, they did let her take that placement exam, and the same young woman that they were placing into the remedial math class, they were now placing into the advanced math class. And the same young woman who at age 12 thought that she couldn't get unit conversion, at age 14 was taking calculus at the local university. And so that first experience with Nadia kind of got me interested. You know, maybe this was just a fluke, maybe this was just a one-off. So I started working with her younger brothers. And then a couple of things happened over the next I would say about 2 years. One, the firm I was working for, and I use the term very generously, it was myself, my boss, and his dog. And dog was the chief economist. And his wife became a professor at Stanford. My boss's wife, not the dog. Became a professor at Stanford Law School. And so we moved the firm out here. And the other thing that happened is word got around in the family that free tutoring was going on. And so I found myself every day after work on the phone with 10, 15 cousins, family, friends, all over the country. And to kind of help myself scale a little bit, I started, you know, my background was in software, so I started writing these little exercise generators for them because I saw that they needed more practice, they needed to review concepts, it would kind of give them hints if they didn't know how to do something. And you know, I put a little database behind it so I could keep track of things. And that was the first Khan Academy. It had absolutely nothing to do with videos. And it was November of 2006, you know, all my friends and Suma and Zulia, I guess y'all are calling Dr. Ramzan and Dr. Ramzan, but I was actually at a dinner party at their house, and you know, and all of my friends knew that I had this crazy project where I was tutoring my cousins and I was working on this software, and after a lot of the folks had left, I was showing off the software to Suma and Zulia and a couple of other folks. And Zuli actually asked me, well, you know, how are you? This is cool, Sal, but how are you scaling this up? How are you scaling your lessons up? And I said, you know, I'm not. It's actually a lot harder to do with 15 cousins than I could do with just Nadia. And he said, well, you know, just a crazy idea. Why don't you make some lessons as videos and upload them onto YouTube? And I immediately said, no, that's a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano. It is not for serious mathematics. But I went home that weekend, got over the idea that it wasn't my idea, and I decided to give it a shot. And I put those first few videos on really the concepts that I saw that a lot of my cousins were having trouble with, whether it's exponents or negative numbers or basic algebra. And I started telling my cousins, hey, look, here's a resource for you. You can review it. You can watch this stuff. It can introduce the concept. And then when we get on the phone, you can ask some questions. And so we did that for about a month, and after about a month I said, well, what do y'all think? And they somewhat famously and backhandedly told me that they liked me better on YouTube than in person. And I think, you know, it's kind of a fascinating point of feedback, and it's interesting to think about why they were saying that and also what they weren't saying. And when you view it from their point of view, it actually made a lot of sense that, hey, look, you know, if you're trying to understand something, it's really intimidating if someone is there waiting for you to understand it. If you're in 9th grade and you're a little bit foggy on dividing decimals, it's embarrassing. But here you can go and watch it at your own time and pace. No one really has to know about it. So they really liked that on-demand aspect about it. But what they weren't saying is that they didn't appreciate having me in their life to motivate them, to take interest in what they're doing, to dig deeper, to answer their questions. So I kept going. I kept making more and more of these videos. And it soon became clear that people who were not my cousins were watching. And at first, you know, the comments started to come in on YouTube, and you know, sometimes there was as simple as a thank you. And even that was a big deal. I don't know how much time y'all spend on YouTube. Most of the comments are not thank you. They're some little bit more edgy. But then the comments got even more intense. This is the reason why I passed my algebra class. This is the reason why I'm able to major in engineering. This is the reason why after leaving the military I'm able to re-engage and go back to college. I remember in those early days there was this family that's the mother emailed me, and I brought my wife over immediately, and I said, look at this is incredible. She wrote, both of my sons have learning disabilities. The site is the only thing that's really getting through to them. Because of that, her and her entire family pray for me and my entire family every night. And you got to imagine how strange that was. I was an analyst at a hedge fund. I wasn't used to people praying for me. It was a very, or at least in that way, at least. And so, as you can imagine, this thing and the traffic kept growing and growing and growing, and I just started thinking more and more and more about it. 2008, I set it up as a 501c3 not-for-profit, and even then I didn't quite think that this is what I was going to do for my life in the short term. I said, oh, maybe we can get some funding and build a team around it or get some volunteers. But by 2009, the site was reaching about 100,000 people every month, and this was frankly all I was focused on. And so, you know, my wife and I, we sat down, we looked at our finances. You know, we had a little bit of savings for a down payment on a house, which I think those of us who live out here know that's no small thing. And but we said, look, it's not crazy for me to give it a shot, to try to start this thing as a real organization, to kind of live off of savings until we can get someone to support it. And I think all entrepreneurial efforts, and I've met several entrepreneurs here in the room, I think they all start from that point of, I guess you could almost say wild optimism bordering on delusion. You say, oh, you know, this is such a high, this was a not-for-profit, but it's the same idea. There's such a high social return on investment. Sure, someone is bound to notice this and support this project. But, you know, I quit my job, and I started pitching it to folks, and, you know, probably 7-8 months goes by. You know, I was getting $5, $10 donations over PayPal. If it was any of you, thank you. So that was helping. But I started to get pretty stressed. You know, we were digging into our savings to the tune of about $5,000 a month. My son had just been born. I had been turned down at this point by about 40 foundations. And then all of a sudden, a $10,000 donation came in. So immediately, I see who it is. Her name is Ann Doer. She was local, based in Palo Alto. So I immediately sent her an email. I said, thank you so much for this incredibly generous donation. This is the largest donation that Khan Academy has ever received. If we were a physical school, you would now have a building named after you, which I think is fairly cheap. And Ann immediately wrote back and said, well, you know, I'm a fan. I use the site with my daughter. I use it myself. I would love to learn more about what you're doing. So I think 3 or 4 days later, we had lunch at an Indian buffet restaurant in downtown Palo Alto. And Ann says, you know, so what's your goal here? And I told her, look, you know, when the IRS makes you fill out the paperwork to be a not-for-profit, there's a little part of the form that says mission, colon, and then a line and a half. And I filled out a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And Anne said, well, that's ambitious. How do you see yourself doing that? And I told her, no, this is a mission. I think it's something we could always strive for. It's not like I'm just going to achieve it tomorrow and check box and then move on to healthcare or something. But I think we can make a lot of progress there. And I showed her the screenshot of the software that I had been writing since 2005. I showed her the testimonials, the letters I was getting from folks. I was showing her the viewership of the videos, the use of the site. And Anne said, well, it seems like you're surprisingly been able to make a lot of progress, but I only have one question. How are you supporting yourself? And in as proud of a way as possible, I said, I'm not. And Anne kind of processed that, and we parted ways. And literally, it was about 15 minutes later, I'm driving into my driveway. I get a text message from Anne, and it says, you really need to be supporting yourself. I've just wired you $100,000. So that was a good day. And frankly, it was the start of a whole cascade of crazier and crazier events. A month later, this is summer of 2010, me and a buddy, Aragon, we were running a little summer camp for middle school students in Portola Valley. And it was the reason why I wanted to do it is, hey, I was this virtual teaching guy. I was making these lectures and making these software exercises. But if students can get that at their own time and pace, I always said, well, what could a physical classroom be used for? And I never viewed it as somehow replacing a physical classroom. I always viewed these tools as somehow liberating a physical classroom, so it could be more interactive, more Socratic, more based on simulations and games. And so we were running a little simulation where we had 6 middle school students playing a game of Risk, while the other 20 students traded securities based on the outcome of the game of Risk. Very good game. I recommend it for y'all. And while that was happening, all of a sudden, I start getting text messages from Anne, which you could imagine I now take very seriously. And they actually had, they came they came all at once. It was hard to tell which one came before which, but they read along the lines of, I'm at the Aspen Ideas Festival in Aspen, Colorado, in the main pavilion. Bill Gates on stage, last 5 minutes talking about Khan Academy. So I didn't know what to make of this, so I immediately boot the nearest 7th grader off of a computer, and I start looking for some evidence of this thing that Anne seems to be referring to, and after about 20 or 30 minutes, I found the footage. It was literally Walter Isaacson, head of the Aspen Institute, asks Bill Gates, what are you excited about? And Bill, I call him Bill now, and Bill just starts talking about, well, there's a site I use called Khan Academy. I use it with my children. I use it myself. And he went on and on and on. And you could imagine how I felt. I mean, at one level, this felt like a dream. This felt surreal. But then actually, I started to get a little nervous. I said, those videos were for Nadia, not Bill Gates. This is and then I went home, and I had even some other people independently heard about it and started emailing me. And then I told, obviously, my wife and all my close friends. But then I said, well, what do I do now? What's the protocol? Do I call him? And I'm guessing he's not listed. And they left me in that limboed state for about 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I'm in my walk-in closet ready to record a video, and all of a sudden, the cell phone rings, and it's a Seattle number. So I answer it. Hello. This is Larry Cohen. I'm Bill Gates' chief of staff. You might have heard that Bill's a fan. Yeah, I heard that. If you're free in the next few weeks, we'd love to fly you up to Seattle and find out more about what you're doing and see if there's ways that we might be able to support you. And I was looking at my calendar for the month, completely blank. So I said, yeah, maybe next Wednesday I've got to do some laundry, cut my nails, but I think I could go up to Seattle, meet Bill Gates. And at almost the exact time, some folks from Google reached out and said, hey, we're interested in what you're doing. A lot of people at Google have been using your resources either themselves or with their children. What would you do if you had $2 million? And I said, is this an open question? Because there's, buy new shoes or something. But they clarified. And I told them the exact same thing that I told Anne and the Gates Foundation, that I would invest it. Sure, I would continue to make videos. We can translate the videos, but I showed them the software, so we could create a truly interactive platform, that the education isn't just through listening to short videos, it's through practice, it's through feedback, it's through building portfolios of creative works, it's by creating a community so that people can work together and mentor each other. And so in fall of 2010, everything came together, and we got our first initial support from Google and the Gates Foundation to allow us to build a real organization. And since then, many other folks have come to support us. But as a not-for-profit executive director, I said we're always looking for more support. And what we started working on was essentially the software part of Khan Academy. And this graph, I guess you could say, we call this our knowledge map. And I'd like to show this because it shows how we think about at least mathematics education. And we're now starting to think beyond math. As you saw, the videos are broader than just math. But the general idea here is each of those circles are a concept in mathematics. One-digit addition, one-digit subtraction, two-digit addition. And as a student shows mastery or proficiency in a higher skill, it moves them down to more and more advanced skills. And right now it goes all the way down to college-level calculus. And on some level, that's common sense. That's the way you would play a video game. You would try level 1, you keep working on level 1 until you beat the level 1 boss, and then you go to level 2. It's how you would learn a martial art. You keep working at the white belt skills until you master them, and then you become a yellow belt. But what we point out is it is not the way that a traditional school model works. A traditional school model, we group students together, usually by age, and then we move them together at a set pace. And what normally happens is the sum of class time is used for lecture, then students go home, they try to do homework, then the next day there might be a little bit of homework review, then another lecture, homework, lecture, homework. That continues for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then you have an exam. And let's say the exam is on basic exponents, and let's say I get an 80%, you get a 90%, you get a 95%. Even though that exam identified those gaps, even the 95% student, what was the 5% that they didn't know? The whole class will then move on to the next concept, usually a more advanced concept that's building on the last one, say negative exponents or logarithms or fractional exponents. And to understand on some level how strange that is, imagine if we did other things in our life that way, like home building. So you get the contractor in and you say, well, we've been told that we have 3 weeks to build the foundation, do what you can. So the contractor does maybe it rains, maybe some of the workers fall sick. 3 weeks later, you get the inspector in. The inspector looks around and says, okay, that part's not quite up to code. That part, the concrete's still wet. I'll give it an 85%. You say, oh, great, that's a C+. Let's build the first floor. You build the first floor, same exact idea. 3 weeks go by, inspector, 75%. Then you build the second floor, third floor, fourth floor. Then all of a sudden, while you're building that fourth floor, which would be analogous to, say, learning algebra, the whole building collapses. And if your reaction to that is the reaction that a lot of people have to education, they might say, oh, maybe you had a bad contractor, or maybe you needed more inspection. But the reality is that the process was broken. You are artificially constraining how long a student had to learn something, pretty much ensuring that there would be a variable outcome. And when you identified those gaps, you just ignored them and then you built on top of them. And so what we try to move in the direction of is, instead of holding fixed when and how someone learns something, and the variable is how well they learn it, A, B, C, D, and F, do it the other way around. Every student should get to an A level, 100% level in, say, basic exponents. And what's variable is when and how long they actually have to work on the material. This right over here is just one of a bunch of dashboards of how Khan Academy has started to be used inside of classrooms. When some early schools started to reach out to us in 2010 and 2011 and said, well, how would you use your tool? We'd say, well, look, there's always been this holy grail in education of true differentiation. Every student is different. Every student has different gaps and learns different things at different rates. And so what we would do is have a math classroom where every student is going at their own pace, where they're mastering concepts before moving on, reviewing it, et cetera, and we would arm the teacher with a whole series of dashboards so that they can see how the class is progressing. If all of the class students are progressing just fine, they could take some class time to do a Socratic dialogue, to do a project, to do a simulation. But if they do see that some students are struggling with the concept, let's say right over here, Matt is having trouble with solid geometry, the system colored that thing in red, the teacher can say, okay, I could either do a very focused intervention with Matt on that and let all the other students work at their own pace, or even better, get one of the other students to, say, Kit over there, who's already mastered it, to tutor his classmate. And we've started, kind of trying to understand what kind of results we might get if classrooms move in this direction. And the one thing I want to make clear is we don't view this as some type of a silver bullet, or you can just drop it into a classroom and then all of a sudden the butterflies will fly and the flowers will bloom. It's a tool, and like any tool, it's only going to be as good as kind of the context in which it's used. And one of the most exciting contexts has been a school in Oakland, California. It's a charter school, Oakland Unity. And this is a school that I think 4 years ago, they were in the 20th percentile. This is a 9th grade algebra class. They were in the 20th percentile in the state of California. And they've had an incredible set of teachers, and their lead teacher is Peter McIntosh. And he's always dreamt of turning his classroom into a classroom where students have more ownership over their learning. They're learning at their own pace. It's much more of a community of learners. But he just needed a tool, and so he's become a very heavy user of Khan Academy, and they've seen fairly dramatic results. And most recently they've obviously in 2011 76th percentile, and then the last year they were at the 99th percentile, and there were only 9 9th grade classrooms in the state of California that were doing better than this 9th grade algebra classroom in Oakland. And what's been interesting about that, he's like, yeah, it's great that they're getting great math test scores, but the meta-level skill that they're learning is even more important. That ability to take control over their own learning, to say, hey, I'm going to set that goal, I'm going to get there, and I have the teacher, I have these tools, I have my peers as resources to push me forward. And when someone has that mindset, then they're going to be good in pretty much anything that they try to tackle. But the one thing we remind ourselves is of our 10 million users, still only 1 million of them are actually in formal classrooms. Still 90% are outside of those. And so I'll show you this next testimonial that we recently got that, at least in my mind, shows the power of human potential if you just give them the right tools.
So I actually dropped out of high school twice, both during my freshman year. And when I eventually came back, I was put in sort of lower level math and science classes because I was so behind. Then I discovered Khan Academy, and I was able to skip 2 years worth of math just through using the site. And I came into school, I took the exam with students who had been enrolled in the class all year, and I was actually able to get the highest or the second highest scores in the class. So for me, Khan Academy really changed the trajectory of my entire life, because without it, I don't think I ever really would have been inspired to learn and to love math and to love science. I ended up graduating as a valedictorian and going on to Princeton, where I'm now a computer science major, and I'm absolutely passionate about learning, about computers, about math, about science. And without Khan Academy, I don't think that these things would really matter to me the way that they do today. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everyone at Khan Academy, Saul and the team. Please keep doing the good work that you're doing, because you're really changing lives.
What's been exciting about that story is when we found out that Charlie's a computer science major, we said, well, we have internships. And so he applied and he rocked all the interviews. We had strong hire, everyone who interviewed said strong hire. And they're like, who is this guy? And I was like, why are you surprised? We helped educate him. No, but it's exciting that now, and he just accepted, so he's going to be joining us this summer, and so it's kind of come full circle. He obviously benefited from the tool, and now he'll be able to help, hopefully, the next generation benefit even more from what we're trying to do. Now, as was introduced, what's exciting for me is that we're kind of plugging in a little bit more to I guess you could say the system. We had an announcement with the College Board 3 weeks ago where they are announcing the new SAT that they're going to have out in 2016. But part of that is the realization, or I guess a recognition of the fact that there always has been at least a perceived inequity in how people prepare for these exams. That some people could afford, and a lot of people can't afford the prep classes and whatever else. And so we're going to work together to create not just free materials, but to really make the world's best materials for preparing for the SAT and frankly a lot of other tests. But what I like to emphasize is that this isn't going to be test prep in its traditional sense. As we all know, or maybe we don't know, all studies of traditional test prep, if you're kind of cramming 3 weeks before a test like the SAT or the AP exams, or a month before, you might be able to get a 30-point improvement, a slight improvement here or there just by getting some familiarity, but it's not going to dramatically change the outcome. What really matters is how strong of a foundation in reading, how strong of a foundation in math and science do you actually have over the last few years going into the test. So when we talk about doing this isn't about just, hey, pick C if you're trying to guess, or test-taking strategies. We'll have that, but the foundation will be starting you wherever you are in either reading or grammar or English or math, and getting you to where you need to go so that you really have a strong mastery of the fundamentals. Now, the other thing that a lot of y'all probably thought about is everything I've talked about so far is essentially the world we live in. It's the English-speaking world, it's the developed world, but what about everyone else on the planet? And what's been interesting is, all of these are pictures of other, mainly NGOs, taking our work and bringing them out into villages, sometimes very remote villages. And all of these are fascinating stories. Probably the craziest is the one there in the top right. About 2-3 years ago, I used to give talks like this, and I said, who knows, maybe one day we'll be used in Mongolia, just imagining the furthest place on the planet I could imagine. And then a few months later, I get an email from Mongolia. And it was the young woman up there, her name is Zaya, and she wrote that, kind of similar to Charlie, that she started using Khan Academy when she was 14 or 15. It's really helped her. She's enjoying math, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was like, oh, that was really cool. And then I read the email a little bit more carefully, and it turned out that, when I saw her video, I said, okay, she must be middle class, upper middle class. She spoke English quite well. She had access to the internet. But then I read the email, and it turned out there was a group of engineers from Cisco Systems who were using their vacation time to go to Asia and set up computer labs with internet in orphanages. And what you see in that picture right there, those are orphan girls in Mongolia using Khan Academy. And Zaya was one of those orphan girls. And what's been even crazier since then is that she's now started contributing to Khan Academy, I guess like Charlie, where she started to help us with the actual translation efforts. Now, one thing that we launched just this past fall, we launched a fully Spanish Khan Academy. Not just the videos, also the exercises, teacher dashboards, everything. We launched Brazilian Portuguese 2 months ago. We're going to launch Turkish French in short order. And our goal is over the next 5 years or so to have it in all of the world's major languages. And to get a feel for what at least the videos feel like in other languages, I'll show you this next montage.
Me comí 2 quartos de pizza.
L'hypoténuse commune, ok.
7, 13, 15.
और मैं इस हाथ से इस ब्लॉक को धकेलने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ इस डायरेक्शन में.
توجد قطعتين من معدن النحاس والزنك.
P R به توان 2 ضرب داره.
הגיעה הנקודה שבה שוק הסיום של הזווית חותכת את מעגל היחידה.
ili muweze kuelewa na kuweza.
Into yokuqala kufuneka siyazi kukuba kubani
16 bölü 16 1'e eşittir.
Muitas e muitas outras coisas importantes.
I'm Zaya from Mongolia. Your videos are so interesting and funny. Make more lessons.
I watch that when I get lazy. Let's see. So, big picture, these are all pictures of Khan Academy being used all over the planet. This is something I tell to everyone involved in Khan Academy, and I want to emphasize it's way more than just me now. Obviously, we have supporters. We're a team of about 60 folks now. We've had 14,000 people help us subtitle videos, translate things. There's obviously 300,000 educators who are using us in their classrooms, and they're also giving us feedback on how we can get better. And what I tell all of them is, you hear a lot of people say, oh, something's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I actually think that what's going on right now is a once-in-a-millennium opportunity, where we're at this inflection point, and whenever you're at an inflection point in history, and the information revolution, whatever you want to call it, is definitely one of them, it introduces new opportunities, but it also introduces new problems. But usually, you have institutions take advantage of the new opportunities to try to solve some of the new problems. And it felt kind of delusional 4 or 5 years ago when I was based out of a walk-in closet to think in these terms. But it's getting a little bit less and less delusional that I truly believe that over the next 10, 20, 30 years, this idea called education, that's always been kind of the key determinant between the haves and have-nots, is going to get much closer to something like clean drinking water or shelter and become a fundamental human right. Thank you. Take some questions now.
So we've been, throughout your talk, we've been accumulating questions from the audience, so I'm just going to start reading them off for the Q&A. First one, would you consider hiring student teachers with proper credentials?
Yeah, well, you know, we are always hiring, you know, in my book I write about the fact that, you know, to me the biggest credential is evidence of what you have created. And we have hired, we obviously hire a lot of college students, but we've hired high school students who've shown really strong abilities to program or create or design or do things. So the simple answer is, yeah, I mean, you know, for us, we're just looking for great people to either help us as volunteers or even help us in a more formal way.
How do you think students and others can get involved with education as well?
Yeah, you know, I think whether it's education or any other, you know, I guess big issue that someone's trying to tackle in the world, I mean, my advice is, you know, try to get close to the problem. And I can't stress how I think valuable it was for me. You know, I think if in 2004, you know, Bill Gates kind of descended and said, here's some resources, build an online learning platform, I think I would have probably gone the wrong direction. I think what was really valuable for me was that I was working with my cousins. I was seeing in very real terms what was working and what wasn't working. And so for anyone who kind of wants to say go into education or anything, I would say get your metaphorical hands dirty and go out there, start doing things. If it's in particular in kind of relative to the Khan Academy world, you know, we would love to see. I think there's a huge opportunity of students, like a lot of the folks in this room, a lot of the folks listening, you know, to kind of take our tools, be ambassadors, help train teachers in schools so that they can get more well-versed in the tools, go into after-school programs, summer camps, become the teachers, the coaches for students who otherwise wouldn't have access. You know, figure out ways to get computers into communities that don't have access to things like that. So I think there's a ton of things that could happen.
How does Khan deal with gifted students who do not have access to resources for their intelligence?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, you know, I think that's something that I feel pretty strong about is that, you know, even in the US right now, only 70% of students have access to the internet, and 30% don't. And if you go to the rest of the world, it's the other way around. 30% have access and 70% don't. And obviously, if our mission is a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, that, you know, we have to think about how that gets addressed. The good thing is you know, we're kind of getting to ride on the adoption curve of these technologies, and even though it's not happening as fast as we would like it to happen, you do have, you know, if you compare the internet and especially mobile devices to, say, the adoption of the refrigerator or the adoption of the automobile, it's actually a faster adoption curve. So the exciting thing is, I do think in about 5 or 10 years, you know, even in fairly remote places of the world, what at that time will be considered a cheap smartphone will be better than the fancy smartphones or tablets that all of us have today. And what's exciting about that is, you know, and once again, I mean, this is why I think it's an exciting time to be alive. You know, there's kind of the social justice point of view of like, yes, everyone should have an equal shot. There should be a meritocracy. But then there's the kind of the catalyst for civilization aspect of it. You know, I always think about this idea of if you went 400 years ago to Western Europe, literacy rates for men were about 15–20%, and for women were about 10%. And even then, it was one of the most literate parts of the world. And I would suspect that if you asked someone who could read in, say, you know, Western Europe in the year 1600, say a member of the clergy, what percentage of people do you think are even capable of reading? I would guess that they would say, well, if you had a really good education system, maybe 30%, maybe 40%. We now know that that's wildly pessimistic, that actually it's pretty close to 100% of people are capable of reading. And so fast forwarding back to our time, I always like to think about, well, what similar blinders do we have on today? Right now, if I were to ask a lot of folks, what percentage of people are capable of understanding quantum physics? You might say, oh, maybe 1 or 2%. What percentage of people are capable of doing novel research on cancer? You might say, oh, maybe 1%, maybe 5% if you have a really good education system. But what if the answer is actually 100%? And so I get pretty excited about this idea of, for every Einstein that we discover, there were probably 99 kids kind of getting squandered in a village someplace, not being able to access something, not being able to, because of social or economic reasons. And so if we can get to that world in 30 or 40 years where that's no longer a barrier, I think you're going to increase by at least an order of magnitude the number of people who can contribute to society in a dramatic way, and then that'll just accelerate everything. So I think it'll be pretty exciting.
Wonderful. What, in your opinion, would you say is the biggest problem with today's American education system?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because I think a lot of times, every now and then a reporter asks me, PISA scores come out, hey, the US, we're number, 23, we're right behind Estonia on factoring polynomials, whatever, which I think is actually accurate. But and all the alarm bells start ringing. And I write about this in my book, and we should look at that. And these core skills are really important. But what I always talk about is, to some degree, they're looking at the wrong indicators, because even though other countries are kind of sometimes on average scoring better in say math than American students, you don't see Facebooks and Googles and the same level of research innovation. You don't see that happening other places. You don't see that entrepreneurial spirit, that creativity. And so my advice to everyone who cares to listen is, instead of us trying to say, let's try to emulate the Prussian model of education as implemented otherwhere. I mean, essentially globally, everyone's doing this model of education that was devised by, what's now Germany, but, the seed of Germany, which was Prussia, in the late 1700s, 1800s, which was based on this kind of early industrial revolution model, and that's pretty much globally now. So instead of just trying to implement it as it's done in Singapore, or as it's done in Korea, or as it's done in Finland, I think we should look as Americans and say, well, what's making America innovate so well? Even though we complain about our test scores, if you go 50 years ago, and if you say, what are the top 20 most innovative companies, probably 30% were American. If you go to today, probably 80% are American. So more and more of the innovation, the creativity is actually accelerating in this country, and actually, frankly, 20 miles radius from where we are right now. And so my advice is the schools should become more American and actually should become more like Silicon Valley, where it's okay to fail, where if a student wants to go deep on something, they want to write a novel, create a painting, they want to start a business, let them do it. It shouldn't be that the metronome of the class says, no, you don't have time for that, you have an exam, don't try to start your business. You should try it, you should fail. Failure should be okay, you should embrace it so that you learn from it, and then you tackle the next big idea. So yeah, I would say make American schools have that more kind of Silicon Valley entrepreneurial can-do spirit.
How much time do you spend each day making videos?
I spend, a good day is the videos are what I kind of enjoy most doing, and I try to free up my morning. So I try to do 4 or 5 hours in the morning making videos.
Wow.
Yes.
How have previous experiences in your life shaped the development and improvement of Khan Academy?
Well, yeah, and I mean, your whole life shapes what you end up doing. I mean, I could go back to school. I remember. A lot of people sometimes ask about my own education system, and I went to just a standard public school in Metairie, Louisiana, a suburb of New Orleans, and nothing really notable about it except for the fact that in about second grade they put me in this what at the time they were called gifted programs, and I remember the first day I went to that class, and the teacher, I still remember it, Miss Roussel, actually there's two teachers, Miss Roussel and Miss Krause, asked, I was 7 years old, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, are you asking me? I'm 7 years old. I said, yeah, what do you like to do? And I said, well, I like to draw, I like puzzles, I like, It's like, okay, we'll draw then. And I thought it was a big joke. I was like, well, I'm getting out of regular class to come to this place where these two teachers are letting me do whatever I want. And when I look back on it, I don't remember most of everything else I did in second grade except what I did in that class. That class made me more comfortable with trying to make things and trying to have crazy ideas and whatever else. I think if you fast forward all the way to my job right before Khan Academy. I sometimes make fun of the whole hedge fund thing, but I have to say my boss, incredible guy. When you start your careers, your natural instinct is to just run as fast as you can and work as hard as you can. And right when I started working for him, I wanted to impress him, and I was working late hours, and he started to say, Sal, you've got to go home. And I was like, no, I want to do more. He's like, no, I'm not telling you that just to be nice to you. You've got to go home, because our jobs as investors isn't about just doing more work and making more decisions. It's about making a very few decisions, but making good decisions. And if you spend all of your cycles and just running, and you don't have time to recharge, you're going to make bad decisions, and we're not going to perform well. And so for me, that was wow, that's true. But you, at the same time, you don't see people practicing that way. So many times the impulse is to just kind of run yourself and drain your actual your creative juices.
Can you describe the best classroom you've seen that incorporated Khan Academy?
Yeah, we've started observing a lot of really neat classrooms. I was just in Austin, Texas, actually, for the whole College Board announcement, and there's a school there, and I encourage y'all to look it up on YouTube, Acton Academy, Acton. It just started 3-4 years ago as a K-5 school. They've just extended in the middle school and high school, and it is it's mixed age. The students learn at their own pace. They really give a lot of the autonomy to the students to define what is happening in the classroom. And I was amazed when I literally, the day I visited, they started the morning. I visited the elementary school. They started the morning. You had a bunch of 6-year-olds through 10-year-olds in a circle, and they were talking about things like, grit and perseverance and what's it like, to have kind of strength of character. And I asked them, y'all do this all the time? You're like, yeah, we have to have a conversation like this. That day they were using Thomas Edison as an example. And so that was kind of neat, just even seeing 6-year-olds think about things like that. I remember, actually they asked a question, what's the thing in your life that's going to require the most perseverance? And then I had a friend with me, and I wrote down 6-pack abs. But anyway, that was I'm still working on it. But then after that, they broke off, and the 6-year-olds kind of paired up, and they started talking about their goals with each other. These are 6-year-olds. And then a middle school student came down with like a clipboard and started reviewing the goals with her 2 students that she was mentoring, these 2 6-year-olds. And it was just incredible for me to see how much responsibility young people can have if you're willing to give it to them. And that kind of opened my mind as a parent of maybe what's possible.
This one's a deep one. What inspires you?
What inspires me? Well, it's, I think, I don't want to sound cheesy, but, as far as we know, you only got one shot at this thing we call our lives. And, when I read a lot of science fiction, and I recommend all of y'all to read a lot of science fiction as well, because what's powerful about science fiction is it thinks about things on kind of an epic scale. Actually, everybody who joins Khan Academy or interns at Khan Academy, I make them read the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov. It's epic scale. The Galactic Empire is going to go into a dark ages, and instead of the dark ages being 10,000 years, he's going to make it only 1,000 years by creating a foundation where all of the world's knowledge can be in one place and civilization can rebuild from that. And I think a lot of times, and I would say even 50 years ago when Isaac Asimov was writing these things, yeah, that's science fiction. That's just crazy ideas. It's fun to kind of take these flights of fancy. But we're now living in a world where that's not science fiction anymore. In fact, the bigger the idea, the better. And you're seeing it. You're seeing it with folks like Elon Musk, with Tesla, and he wants to send people to Mars. That's science fiction, but he's doing it literally through force of will. You see, the Google with their self-driving cars, and they're putting these balloons all over the world to create a grid so that everyone has access to the internet. These are bigger ideas than typical science fiction. So what inspires me? It's, if people think on that scale, but then also have the motivation and the belief and the energy to execute on it, I think that makes you want to do something similarly big and persevere on it.
So you mentioned your transition from your job to pursuing Khan Academy. Was it hard to turn away from a stable job to pursue a venture like that?
The simple answer is yes. I actually would say that I was fairly conservative in that I didn't want, I wasn't looking to, in the late 90s, I had kind of done the Silicon Valley startup thing. And the irony is I went to business school thinking, this whole startup thing isn't for me. I don't have the emotional fortitude to do it. And, so I did a hedge fund instead. Well, yeah, so but yeah, it was I remember, the time that my wife and I actually agreed to do it, that was probably the fourth time we thought about it. But this time it's like, okay, there feels like something there. But the very next day when my mom found out, she called my wife and said, "What did you let him do?" And it was this kind of typical South Asian mother for those, not typical, but it was the demographics of who I'm speaking to. But yeah, and it was. And I'll say, the story, it sounds good, but there are times there that you are. It hurts your, when you go to a dinner party with your wife and, he analyst hedge fund, people, you get a little bit of respect and you're like, this and that. And I remember like December or January of 2010, literally going to a party and, it was actually one of my wife's kind of work parties and she's a physician. And then they asked me, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" And I was like, "Oh, I make videos on YouTube." And literally, I as they walked away, I heard the guy tell his wife, "Good thing his wife's a doctor," right? And you can imagine that hurts. But I think that's yeah. So it was hard. It was hard.
What is your view on giving underprivileged women education in countries where it is politically or religiously not normal?
Yeah, what's been neat about at least my experience so far is that, me and the team at Khan Academy, we've been focused just doing what we're doing, building, a lot of the stuff that I just showed you. But then there's been these incredible, and even in my book, I write about, it would be cool if in, say, Afghanistan, where there might be communities where it might be hard for a young girl to go to school. Either, the community won't allow it, or maybe their own families might not think it's the right thing for them. One day, if they're able to have access to this, that maybe that could be a really powerful, empowering tool. And what's been, but I didn't take action because I was like, I have enough to do with what we're doing now. But what's been neat is other groups have taken our stuff and they have started to go out there and try to reach a lot of these types of populations. And it's still very, very, very early, but we are starting to hear, we're, all the cases that we just heard about, we've just started to hear there's people who are actually trying to bring it into the prison system, which is, it's captive audience. I shouldn't joke. No, but in all seriousness, it's actually, right now people go to the prison system and it hardens them and they often leave worse. How great it would be if they could improve themselves and if they can test their skills, if they get a high school diploma and come out more empowered. So yeah, that's kind of what keeps us all going.
How useful do you think the Khan Academy model is for teaching the humanities and the arts compared to the sciences?
I think they're all different. I think this whole mastery, do exercises, build skills on top of each other, I think that could be very good for kind of the core of a lot of the STEM subjects. I would say the core of physics, chemistry, biology. And then on top of that, you want to layer that with experiments and dialogue and projects and whatever else. I think there's some things in the humanities that, grammar, you could kind of start tackling that way. But I think something like writing could be much more similar to our computer science platform, where you create projects, you get peer feedback from other folks, it gets voted up or down, you keep working on it, you build portfolios of work. I think things like reading comprehension, you could do with some type of a practice feedback model, but it would be different than what you're doing in mathematics. And once again, that's just the first layer, and hopefully it liberates the classroom to kind of focus on the deeper ones.
Final question for here. Do you think people in the future will continue using Khan Academy?
I hope so. Yeah, look, I think that's kind of, that's what we think about every day at the team is, what can we do? And it's not so much, are they going to use this or not use this? It's much more of like, okay, we've built this platform, we have some traction. How do we make sure that we, in 10 years, if Khan Academy is just another website that even 100 million people are using, or a billion people are using, well, that's nice, that's like a good thing. But if it hasn't fundamentally altered some of what we've talked about, if it hasn't served as a catalyst so that classrooms still look the same, if still that young girl in Afghanistan still doesn't have access, if credentials are still the same and they're not based on kind of the creative work you've done, then I think that we haven't fulfilled our potential. And so that's what keeps me up at night, is how do we make sure that, it's not just a site that, and this was actually the motivation for being a not-for-profit, to really take the long view, not the shorter-term view, is how do we make sure that it's just not a successful website or successful software tool or mobile app, how do we make sure that it's actually an institution that drives true systemic change?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.